If I said the words to you, Valtteri Bottas joins Red Bull, would you find that totally weird?
Hello and welcome back to The Fast and the Curious with me, Betty Glover, and our resident Formula One geek, Christian Hugill. No Greg James today, but we've got somebody joining us on the sofa that we have wanted to speak to for a very, very long time. She spends her life in the paddock. You might know her from Drive to Survive and also from being the Formula One reporter for BBC 5 Live. She's always around the paddock. She's always talking about the biggest stories. She is the brilliant Jennie Gow.
Oh, thank you for having me. What an introduction. Hanging around like a bad smell. They can't get rid of me. They've tried, but
not at all.
Came back.
No, never.
I'm really glad you're here because I was thinking this on the way, Betty, that Jennie was the presenter on the first ever time I talked about Formula One on TV or radio or anything like this. Yeah. I think it was 2018 off the top of my head. But yeah, I went on 5 Live when I worked at the BBC, like you've worked at the BBC, Betty, and went on 5 Live, and I was terrified.
Yeah.
And Jennie and lovely Jolien Palmer looked after me, held my hand.
I've got a similar story. So when I first started at 5 Live, I used to do like a lot of bulletins, sort of overnight, the late bulletins. And I remember, and like this must have been like quite a few years ago, and there's not really many like women that were talking about sport at that time. So I'd be doing the bulletin, queuing to a reporter. It's always a man. And I remember it was like a Saturday evening, queuing to Jennie Gow. And I was like, oh my God, this woman is so cool. There is a woman out there leading the Formula One coverage for BBC Formula One. And I was like, this is sick. So yeah, now she's here on our podcast.
Oh,
Lovely to have you here.
It's so nice to be here. And it is one of those things you work through your life, don't you? And there are moments where you go, why aren't there more females doing these jobs? And it does stick out like a sore thumb when you actually find a female who's a reporter, who's a correspondent. We don't get those roles very much. But I do love it when I get messages through on X or Insta from young journalists saying, oh yeah, I'm really inspired by you, and you know, I'm trying to do this because you've led that way. And I look at Louise Goodman.
Legend. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And she led the way for people like me. So there's always
you should just say, for we've got a lot of younger listeners. Louise was the pit lane reporter on ITV's Formula One coverage. So when I was like 8 years old growing up watching F1, Louise was the pit lane reporter and was interviewing the drivers when they retired. And I got so excited to meet her when I was a kid. There's a picture of me with Louise Goodman in a Jenson Button BAR Honda shirt like this big. And I saw her in the paddock in Austin. I was like, oh my God, it's Louise Goodman. Legend, Louise Goodman. Jennie, carry on, sorry.
Well, she was the first female broadcaster to talk about F1 anywhere.
Wow.
And she's still in the paddock to this day. She comes back for races that she likes. Who wouldn't?
Good for her.
And she's, as you say, an absolute legend. And I think people like her, Lee McKenzie, Susie Perry, they formulate what your idea of life could be in F1. And I saw them and I thought, you know what? There is no barrier. I'm going for that. And here I am on a sofa talking about F1.
You say that you just love talking about cars. You love cars. Has that always been a thing? What made you love them?
Yeah, I have no idea. Honestly, there's no family history of it. My parents and whole family don't really do sport.
Oh, really?
I never grew up in that sporting household. I watched all sport, but sport in general has ruled my life for a very long time. And I remember watching the Commonwealth Games, and at the time I had these pieces of paper and I wrote down all the timings for the athletes doing athletics, and took notes of who was on the podium and all those sorts of things. And I desperately wanted to do an Olympics. I'm not jealous at all. And I still have that like one outstanding thing to tick off my list, which is I want to work on an Olympics at some point. But no motorsport, so how am I going to do it?
I think you can cross over.
I need to infiltrate another sport.
Yeah.
Need to be niche.
So you've always loved sport.
Sorry, we've digressed so much.
Yeah,
this
we
is going to be the theme
do what
of
you
this.
like, Jenny. The rules
Yeah.
are very loose here, and the
That's
team
great.
principal's not here. Do what you like.
Yeah, we just like to have a good time, okay? But you say that you love sport. Sport's a massive part of your life. You love motorsport. So what was it like when you first got that Formula One gig and you first went into a pit lane?
So just to give some backstory to this. So I didn't go into the F1 paddock as my first paddock. I did a season of MotoGP. So I had some experience of what a paddock would be like and standing on a grid when all the riders are there waiting to go off. I experienced that for a year. And then I crossed over to F1. And the two paddocks are totally different. Is there someone at the door?
I think there was
Yeah,
a knock.
tell you what, tell the story. I'll go on. I'll answer the door. Carry on.
Oh, I love that. Good housekeeping. Maybe it's a surprise.
Yeah, maybe. Who is it?
I don't know. I mean, can't carry on because I'm too curious.
What was that?
It was an Amazon delivery.
Oh, good.
Actually, an Amazon delivery. There's a massive red sign that says on air, but it was genuinely an Amazon delivery.
Maybe it's my book.
It could be your book, which is available now on Amazon and all good bookshops.
We've fast forwarded a
Yeah,
lot.
we'll plug the book in a bit. You were saying.
Yeah, so I went into an F1 paddock and it was totally different. There are so many people, like 3,000 to 4,000 people travel in the F1 community. And it's a massive show that they put on week in, week out in different parts of the world. And it kind of normally feels exactly the same wherever you go. But yeah, stepping into the F1 paddock was very surreal. Like, you follow it, you know the people, you've seen it for years, and then all of a sudden you're in it. And there are so many rules.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah.
So many rules.
I get told off at least 114 times a Grand Prix weekend. And honestly, I got told off so often in Canada, it started to lose it started to lose impact. It's like, yeah, okay, I've done something wrong with you as well. Like,
That's the place that I got told off the most was Canada.
Yeah.
That's weird, isn't it?
Really?
Yeah.
people inside the paddock, French police
Yeah.
officers. I was quite convinced I was going to get arrested
Did
that
the
weekend.
Mounties come and find you?
Oh, all of it. Honestly, I annoyed
What are you
everybody
doing?
it's possible to annoy. Well, there was one French police officer who, on the way into the track, if you ever feel like you've got imposter syndrome, go about your life with the confidence of a French police officer at the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve, who is so confidently telling you that media parking is that way, despite the fact you know, because it's day 3, that it is in fact that way. And you go, we did this yesterday, and I went that way, and that added another half an hour onto my journey, so I'm going to go that way. Because
Yeah.
it is that way, but they don't take that well.
No.
So you get told off. There's so many rules. Get told off all the time.
And my first race as the BBC F1 reporter was Canada 2011, which,
Great race.
if you can remember, it was one of the greatest races I've ever known. It went on for a very long time. And going into a paddock when you don't know anyone is hard. You have to make friends very quickly. Going into a paddock and filling airspace for 4.5 hours when you don't know the rules and you suddenly find yourself on the grid when you're not meant to be on the grid, but you don't know that you're not meant to be on the grid because you don't know the rules.
Nobody tells you any of this.
No, you just have to absorb it like a sponge, but it was already wet. So that didn't work.
It was a wet race.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was my first taste of F1, breaking lots of rules. And one of my most embarrassing stories, I
God.
almost broke Twitter. Now, obviously, X, but then not X.
Yeah.
I didn't. Sometimes I don't realise exactly what I'm saying, and
Have you met my friend Betty Glover?
it's great when Innuendo Bingo was there. I'm on it on a regular basis. I've put my foot in it so many times, but I went into the Lotus at the time, black and gold, hospitality units, and I went to try and fill looking for Colin Farrell because I knew he was there. And I went and spoke to the press officer, only it wasn't the press officer. I got mixed up with who it was. So I actually went up to Bruno Senna,
Ex-F1 driver.
who was a reserve driver at the time. I'd never met him before. I just assumed that he was the press officer.
Fantastic.
Oh my God.
And said,
amazing.
"Excuse me, do you mind if I speak to Colin?" And he looked at me. Now I understand why he was looking at me in such a bedazzled way and just said, yeah, sure.
Do what you like, yeah.
So I went up to Colin and said, oh, excuse me, I am Jennie Gow from the BBC. Can we have a quick word? And he just looked at me and said, no, I've lost my voice. I was like, come on, Colin, I know you're faking it. Come outside. I don't know what gave me such balls to do that, but I just grabbed him outside in the pouring rain. Desperation had kicked in by then. I was absolutely, I mean, it was sodden wet. And I went outside and I just said, all right, well, I'm ready with Colin when you are. So they threw down to me. And I think at that time it was maybe Ant Davison and David Croft in the box and me just doing the pits. And I said, hi, Colin, how are you? And he said, I'm really good, thanks. How are you? I went, I'm really wet. I don't even know if you can play this.
We can.
But I got back to, I didn't even realise. And he was smirking. I didn't realise what about. I thought he was just happy to be with me. So I got back to looking at Twitter, and I suddenly realised the implications of what I'd said. And I was just like, oh my God.
One of my favourite moments. Do you have any other sort of standout moments? Like, what's the craziest thing that you've witnessed? What's the craziest thing you've seen?
Oh my gosh, there are so many crazy things.
Because since 2011, you've been there through some ridiculous highs for some drivers, some teams, some ridiculous lows.
And I take everything very emotionally. So if I think back to, I spent a lot of time crying, I realise now, in the paddock.
We were talking about this before we came on air,
Have
weren't
you
we?
met our friend Christian Hugel?
At the sport. Yeah. Very good. That I've only cried at the sport once. That was when Lewis won the British Grand Prix this year. But that sounds like it's made you cry more.
So the first one, I think, was when Sir Frank Williams was having his birthday. It was Spain. Pastor Maldonado had just freakishly won the Grand Prix. And everyone was celebrating the birthday and the win in the Williams garage. And suddenly we could see smoke. And I'll get quite emotional even now. I knew I was going to cry.
You did say you were going to cry.
And as a journalist, you're always taught to run towards the fire. So I saw smoke and I thought, I need to go and see what's happening. And it turned out that there was a fire at the back of the Williams garage and everyone had to evacuate from that garage. And it was quite a serious fire. A lot of people had to go to hospital. One guy was seriously hurt after it. But I just remember the mechanics and engineers coming out and they were ashen, like their faces were black. There was a lot of people crying because of the effects of the smoke and the inhalation. And I just remember standing on the now Sauber hospitality unit. They had little steps and just standing there with a couple of other pit lane reporters and just crying because seeing all these grown men and the effects of that and this such high of winning the race and then the celebrations for Sir Frank and then, the end result of that horrific experience. And I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing and it really affected me.
I remember watching at home and it was one of those where I'd stayed watching till the bitter end of the TV coverage because Williams winning then in 2012 was the equivalent of Williams winning now. Say if Albon or Colapinto had won last weekend. So for this unbelievable result, this euphoric high, for then there to be a massive fire. It was like, this can't be happening in one weekend. And I imagine, I couldn't believe it watching at home. To have been there must have just been extraordinary.
What happened? Why was there a fire?
It was something to do with they were filling the fuel at the back of the garage. I think a battery was involved and something happened.
One of the reasons why refuelling changed so much. I know it wasn't during a race, but there was huge changes to the way Formula One cars were refueled after that. Yeah, and I think it made a lot of people think, and luckily, Sir Frank wasn't hurt and he was able to get out of that particular situation. But the ramifications of that, as you say, with every F1 tragedy or something that's serious that has happened, they always learn from it.
Yeah,
and that's one of the
changes,
key factors of how F1 is a step above everything else and why it leads the way, because they always react to those situations and say, okay, that was bad. but we need to learn from it and make sure it doesn't happen again. And they did.
Who are the personalities that stand out to you in all that time? I mean, and I know
obviously you.
Well, thank you.
His head doesn't need to be any bigger, Jenny.
I
for
think
God's
you've
sake.
probably met more interesting people in that paddock than... I mean, nowadays, a lot of people talk about the likes of Gunter Steiner and that sort of thing, but of your, decade plus regularly talking to people on the ground, who are the ones that really stand out for you to talk to?
Obviously, Sir Frank was amazing. You looked into his eyes and you could see a glint and a glimmer even when he was 70, 75. It never changed. It never went away. And I think a lot of those old school drivers who I was lucky enough to meet before they died had the same presence. Like they were cheeky, formidable, polite. I think of Sterling Moss. He was just a joy, a real joy to be able to meet him. And every time someone like he or Murray Walker even said my name, I got a real buzz. I was like, oh, he knows who I am. Even if he was just cued and teed up for it, it was like, oh, he said my name.
And Murray Walker saying, the legendary Formula One commentator must have been extraordinary.
Absolutely. And going to his house and meeting him and seeing like the pictures of his father and the tanks that he used to drive. It was just such an inspiring story. And I think I used that as quite good motivation for myself. I don't really know why. I just thought he was amazing at what he did. So I think the old school drivers are amazing. But if we're talking about the current grid, I suppose that's the thing about F1. Everyone in that paddock has a story to tell, and everyone is inspiring. But you think of Lewis Hamilton and the way that he has turned from somewhat petulant young man to this activist who is now representing so many different people and standing up for so many different people.
It's quite statesman-like in many ways.
Absolutely. And there's no doubt that, that stir is well placed on his shoulders.
Without question.
Yeah. And he's always been extraordinarily kind to me from the very first moment I met him onwards, really. I mean, we've had our moments where he wouldn't answer questions, but that's what you get when you're a reporter trying to speak to someone just after a really bad race, or so he's extraordinary. Sebastian Vettel, another one who is gone beyond the realms of just F1 and is using his status in F1 for greater purpose. Gunter Steiner, as you say, a more recent addition to F1, but he's set the world on fire and ripped up the rule books, which I love. I just love it when someone comes in and goes, you know what, I don't care. And Toto Wolff is another one who just stands head and shoulders above many others as... Like, he'd be the one who you'd want to be like him.
Yeah,
I don't know. What do you think? Who would you, if you had to be a team principal, which one would you want to be like?
I am so different to James Vowles. Like, if there was a spectrum, James Vowles is there and I am the complete other end.
It's a fair comment.
Very far away from him. I'd say, Toto is who you'd want to be like, I think. He's got a great personality, good demeanour. He's humorous, but everyone respects him. You can tell he's very clever.
I completely agree. It's impossible to disagree with that.
Yeah.
There is, you mentioned the cheekiness though. I really do love the Fred Vasseur sort of cheek and the mischievous smile, and the shot that made me fall in love with him was when in Miami, everybody from McLaren was celebrating Lando's first win, and he was just in the middle,
that's
being
amazing.
like, "Yeah, sod it," and having that sense of mischief. It was fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He, I was doing the podcast. It's not my podcast, the BBC's podcast, live from Austin. And Fred celebrated with Ferrari in front of the motorhome and hospitality, and then went upstairs, obviously, to have a debrief for the drivers. But actually, he went upstairs with a bottle of champagne and started pouring it mysteriously on top of people, then ducking away. And then leaning over again and pouring it on someone else. It was just really funny.
So good.
He's so good.
Really? Oh, love it.
He's a refreshing change to the paddock. I think he's very different dynamic to everyone else. And I
love
love
people
that.
who don't take it too seriously. Yeah.
Even though he looks like the most serious person in the world.
Yeah.
But yet he's just a cheeky chappy.
Talking about drivers that you get on with with Valtteri Bottas as well, don't you?
Yeah. So Valtteri and I go way back. And it feels like we've almost done our careers in unison. So he did British F3 when I was doing British F3. And we kind of climbed up the ranks together. And I was so delighted when he was reserve driver and then he got his seat in F1. So yeah, it feels like we've been through a lot. You forget sometimes that these are human beings outside of F1 and they have a life. And it's easy to watch and listen to a race and think, oh, well, he didn't perform very well. Well, you have to think these people are going through other things. They're not just focused solely on F1. They can't switch a button off, even though they might try to, when personal situations in their life take over.
So with your relationship with him, sounds like you obviously know him really well. How do you feel about the news then that we've recently heard this week about Sauber letting him go and Zhou Guanyu, of course? Something that we all expected, but it must be weird for you.
Well, so the way my brain works is very kind of laterally. I was like, oh, that's a shame for him. And I kind of expected it when I last saw him in Austin. Kind of the writing was already on the wall. And I gave him a big hug. And as much as we say we know drivers and they're our friends, and they're not. They are the drivers and we always have to respect them, their privacy. And I was always told by some very wise people, never be friends with a driver. You have to rely on talking about what's actually happening.
It's hard though, isn't it? Because, I'm lucky enough to have known Jennie for a few years. And Jennie, you are a warm, kind, compassionate, caring person. So it is it's hard to switch that line, isn't it? And it must therefore be with Valtteri, who you've spoken to a lot. As you say, you're not his friend, but you have got that relationship with him. He's even, we'll talk about the book a bit later, but he's even, provided a quote for the book. And then you learn this week that his career, certainly for now, as a Formula One driver is over. We've seen drivers come back in the past, but still, I suppose you have to look at that on a human level of feeling sorry for him, but also, do you think as a Formula One journalist and Formula One reporter, differently? Do you think it was the right time? Do you think it's fair? Do you think he could have had longer in Formula One? How do you see it as a reporter more than as someone you know?
If I said the words to you, Valtteri Bottas joins Red Bull, would you find that totally weird? Yes, you would.
I think
saw your
I
face.
would, but
if, just say Red Bull were looking for a stopgap for that second seat. If you looked at second drivers, someone who would just sit in that seat, do what they've been asked to do, he's fast. We know that. He plays the team game very well. If they were looking for a stopgap so they didn't expose their younger drivers to too much too soon, I would say that would be a good fit. We know Carlos Sainz can't go there. He's already signed with Williams and the dads don't get on. So you can't put him in that seat. But someone like a Valtteri Bottas
do you think
would
that's possible,
be a great stop. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think anyone has gone, But all of a sudden, on the train in, actually, I was like, have I come up with something genius?
I completely agree with you. And also, I actually thought last year Valtteri had a bad year. I didn't think he was far enough ahead of Zhou as I'd expect him to be. And I thought last year, if they'd had made this decision this time last year, I'd have actually gone fair enough. I think Valtteri has done really well this season. I think he upped his game personally. I think he's dragged that car into positions it shouldn't be in Q2. I actually think for a team that has got a big rebuilding job to do, he would have been handy to have around next season. And also, I'm not saying they've made the wrong decision, by the way, but I totally see, I have some sympathy for Valtteri. I agree with what you said, because you look back now at Valtteri's record at Mercedes and how many wins he had, how many pole positions he had, how many days where he was just, weren't many, but they were there, faster than Lewis, particularly at a Russian Grand Prix, for example. He was very good on those circuits. Yeah. The struggles of someone like Sergio, you look back now and you going in a top team against a generational talent. I think Valtteri's legacy in Formula One will look back on him very, very favourably. I think he's had a fantastic career. I think he was fantastic at Mercedes. And I completely agree with you. If you needed that stopgap, he wouldn't disgrace himself at Red Bull next year. And that's just how the circus works. I'm delighted for Bortoleto. I think it's great to see talent like him coming through. I don't necessarily think it's the wrong decision. But I totally agree with you. I think Valtteri, he will be remembered well in F1, I think.
Yeah, and I'm quite excited for him on a personal level, because I think this frees him up to do other stuff. And he obviously is very talented when it comes to his newfound passion in cycling.
Well, here's your link to the Olympics.
Oh, yes.
Oh, my Lord.
Valtteri,
I want Jennie Gow and Valtteri Bottas doing cycling coverage for the Olympics.
Exactly.
Oh, that would be great.
We've sorted it for you.
But I think he is the sort of person who could be a world champion at something else. He is so talented. And he's very logical in his approach to what he does. So I wouldn't be surprised if he took on rallying or cycling or triathlon or something and was a world champion in that.
What do you think about Zhou Guanyu? What do you think the future holds for him?
Honestly, don't know. Probably world endurance, Chinese, a Chinese name with a legacy of F1 and what he's achieved there, I think would be great in that series. I feel like he never really got
going
into it, and it was just bad timing this year, I think, and last year for Sauber. They haven't had a car which is competitive, and you speak to the guys that represent Zhou and they're so disappointed that he never got to shine. And I think it's just one of those things. You get a Colapinto gets put in a car and shines, and Zhou didn't ever really get to shine. I mean, the Chinese Grand Prix this year, where he was, he qualified so well. I'm right, and I qualified well, and he brought the car up. He was allowed to bring the car up on the grid in some mad exception to the rules. And he got out there, and the Chinese grandstands full of fans, he must have loved that moment so much. It meant so much to him. I was in tears. Obviously, I cry a lot. I've put that as a pre-process. But just seeing him, I mean, that was he always said it was his destiny. And that felt like it was a destiny fulfilled at that point. He didn't need to do anything else personally to achieve what he wanted to. He was never going to be in a championship winning car, was he? But he was, that moment was just great to watch, and I'm glad he came to F1, but I think the writing was on the wall a long time ago. I'm actually surprised that he held on so long.
So let's talk about Sauber's future then. So we know that it's going to be Nico Hülkenberg making the move from Haas over there, and then, like Christian said, Gabriel Bortoleto, who's making that step up to Formula One. What do you know about him?
Obviously, for so many of our listeners in their early seasons of F1, many others will know this, but Brazil had one of the greatest ever to do it in the legendary Ayrton Senna. And then, really after that, its two biggest names were Rubens Barrichello, who was the number 2 driver to Michael Schumacher at Ferrari for a number of years, also drove for Williams, and then Felipe Massa, who again followed a similar approach. He was at Ferrari, also at Williams. They were both two sort of Formula One nearly men. They won races. Felipe nearly won a world championship in 2008. Rubens never looked quite close to winning a world championship, but again was one of those fantastic number 2 drivers, won races for Ferrari and for Brawn GP. And the way the Brazilian crowd got behind Rubens and Felipe was just like it brought goosebumps watching from home. So the fact that Brazil will have a new driver to get behind is sensational. And my goodness me, if this kid wins races, if this kid can be a championship contender, you look at what Checo's done for Mexico is another example. It will blow F1 up in a new territory again. I mean, Brazil's never, we saw from literally the week Grand Prix just gone, Brazil's never lost its love. But it's great. And also, Betty, we're talking about what do we know about him.
Is he good?
Well, he's got a fantastic junior record. He won F3 last year. He's the championship leader in F2. The last person to, I think, I could have this wrong, but I think off the top of my head, the last person to win F3 and F2 and then go straight into F1 was Oscar Piastri.
Yep.
He's done all right. He deserves his chance. If you win F3 and he may well win F2, if you're coming in, we've been talking a lot in recent years with the likes of Théo Pourchaire, who've done very well in F2, with Nick de Vries had to wait a long time. It's a frustration for Formula One fans when these drivers who do so well in junior series don't get their chance. It's worked out very unfortunately for Théo, who's another one that was linked to Sauber for a long time. But he deserves this chance. So I am pleased he's getting it because he does deserve it.
I might be wrong. I don't think I am. I'll back myself. He's managed by Fernando Alonso.
He's managed by Fernando Alonso.
And
I was going to ask you about that.
Might have something to do with it, because if you're managed by this glorious man, I mean, who wouldn't answer the phone to Fernando?
Yeah, and also,
of course,
I think that really helps in Formula One. If you look at the likes of David Coulthard when he was racing, he was managed by a name we'll all know, Martin Brundle.
In my head, I thought you said David Beckham. That was
David
really
Beckham
weird.
didn't quite make it to F1, unfortunately,
like,
which would have been great.
Why are you talking about David Beckham? Sorry, that's just what I heard.
But then also, I think a massive part of why Oscar Piastri is doing so well, again, when we're lucky enough to be in the paddock, you see how present Mark Webber is. Not at every race, but he is there in the McLaren motorhome alongside Oscar a lot. And you think of Mark's career, the ups and downs, the wisdom. You know, Mark was a quick driver, a race-winning driver as well. Again, if you've got Fernando Alonso on your side, what an advantage that must be, not just for connections and, as Jenny rightly says, answering the phone, but also for having someone to turn to when F1 gets tricky. I can't think of anyone better than Mark Webber. You know, Coulthard must have been helped by Brundle, and now Bortoleto being helped by Alonso. Big help.
That'd be weird when they're both racing in a Grand Prix against each other.
We've never had that dynamic, not that I can remember in the past. I'm sure it must have happened before, but I can't remember it.
I suppose not recently. No, you'd have to look back into when people were brought on as a kind of mentors, and the younger generation was brought through. There is a example, but I just can't pull it to the front of my mind, annoyingly. But yeah, I think the role that Fernando Alonso takes now is very much the elder statesman of F1. And on his day, he can definitely win a race. But he has to have the right car, and it all has to go his way now. And I think you want to leave a legacy, don't you? And obviously it's important to him to have these younger guys coming through that he can support. And he's a fantastic artist still. And he wants to inspire another generation. And I can only think when he gets a Spanish driver into F1, which I'm sure he's trying to do, it will be such an amazing result for him personally, because that's the dream, isn't it? You want to give that legacy to someone else and hand over the baton.
Whilst we're talking about sort of driver market, should we talk about Red Bull? Because we speculated a little bit.
My wild speculation. Please, just can people at home let me know if I'm just barking up a really bad tree?
Oh, they will.
Oh, they will. Trust me. Yeah, the internet tends to. I found that out recently. Good Lord.
But who do we think is going to be that second driver at Red Bull then?
Well, I've already said.
Well,
much Valtteri Bottas. I mean, you heard it here first.
What, Colapinto has a chance?
I think Lawson would go up to make room for Colapinto in the junior levels.
Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it, when you look at both track records, Lawson versus Colapinto. There's not much debate. I mean, Lawson's done a few more races, but he's never had a full-time seat until now, whereas Colapinto got that seat and has had it. So I think they're both in different camps. And in my head, you think, oh, well, Colapinto doesn't have as much experience as Lawson, so put Lawson in the top seat and Colapinto in the junior seat. But they're so close in their abilities. And at the end of the day, you've got Sergio, and what happens to him? Does he get picked up by someone else?
Yeah, because when I asked that question, in my head, I'm thinking Sergio's not going to be there.
I know. I mean,
but then we don't know if he...
The whole mechanics of F1, and I spoke about this the other day, everyone signs so early. Because of Lewis announcing in January what he was doing and going to Ferrari, it forced everyone's hand. And the people that didn't sign, I think, have an advantage. Like Williams could take their time and look at who they actually wanted to sign, and they ended up getting Sainz. And you would never have thought at the beginning of this year that Carlos Sainz, before Lewis Hamilton's announcement, you would never think, okay, Carlos Sainz is joining Williams on a long-term deal next year. You'd be like, that is crazy talk.
He'd never do that.
No. So I still think that's misplaced, and that actually he should have gone to Red Bull. And Perez should have gone to Williams. With all his money, he could have changed the fortunes of Williams very quickly because he brings a massive amount of sponsorship.
And been a good driver for them as well. I still think Checo's quite capable of performing at a team like a Williams.
Absolutely, I think so. And we all realise that the Red Bull second seat is really a difficult seat.
Probably the hardest.
Yeah, absolutely. You're up against one of the best drivers of all time. And the team focus on that driver.
At his peak as well.
Yeah, absolutely. At his very best of his peak as well, after the drive in Brazil. And I think, could anyone succeed in that team? I don't know. And that's why I say Bottas, because I think he could take that pressure. And he's very much he's got that Australian vibe to him now, hasn't he? Of, I don't really give a damn. So it would be like, I don't care about what people are saying. I know I'm a good driver and I'll sit in that car and do anything you want.
I don't think it will happen because I don't think Red Bull look after their drivers well enough for that to happen. I think they are quite happy to throw someone in and let them fry. I think history shows us that they don't care that much. They the way they treated Daniel Ricciardo was poor. That everybody knew, even he knew, that he was on his way out, and yet they didn't handle that in a dignified manner at all. They consistently show they haven't learnt lessons from the past. And they've also shown in the past with Nick de Vries that they will act on a bit of a whim.
Absolutely.
So I think
you're going Colapinto,
I think Colapinto will end up in RB next season, or whatever they're calling it next week. Alongside Yuki. I think they will put Lawson in the Red Bull seat. But I agree with Jennie. I think those two are so interchangeable that I could see them doing a swap midway through next season. If Lawson struggled, they wouldn't worry about doing that. They've done that with Gasly and Albon before, And then I also think, let's all be honest here, there is a massive reason why Sergio Perez is still in Formula One. It's because he brings huge financial advantages. He sells merchandise all over the world. He's got sponsorship backing. He's got rich businessmen backing. But I think Red Bull will possibly see a little bit of a replacement from that in some of the Argentinian connections with Colapinto as well. I think it could financially work for them. And I strongly believe the reason why Red Bull haven't pulled the trigger sooner is because they quite like the money that Sergio Perez brings. And I think they've chosen to do that over winning the Constructors' Championship.
But you also have to take into consideration the Verstappen wish list.
Exactly.
And
that's another example.
They just can't pull the trigger on anyone. It has to be someone that the Verstappens say,
happy with.
Okay.
Because he's got a monopoly over that team.
Yeah, and it has to be... Christian Horner has to approve it. Helmut Marko has to approve it. There are so many moving parts, to that
imagine trying to
equation.
Make a decision.
Exactly.
It's worse than being in government, wouldn't it?
It is actually it's a great analogy that. The Red Bull setup is a bit like sort of, trying to satisfy all your MPs or your state senators. It's exactly like that. So, a Bottas potentially would fit that. And Max going, well, I think I can beat him and he's not going to upset anyone. That said, I still don't think they'll do it. I think I think Max he wouldn't be happy with Sainz. That's maybe too close. And so there was rumours they didn't get on very well. But I think maybe Lawson fits it just enough. And I think it's getting to the point now where money and politics aside, they've got to do something. Checo has...
When? At the end of the season?
At the end of the season,
yeah.
I think.
Not like now.
No, I mean, stranger things have happened.
Harsh.
But it would be unusual. I think now, if they come third in this World Championship...
Which they will.
Exactly. And you've got Checo struggling to get the car into Q3 when Max has started to, he's looked for a couple of races like he can win races again. There was that bit in the middle where he was really struggling and he was in fifth. Now, his last few Grand Prix, he's looked like he could win, and he did win in Brazil. They've got to do something in the winter, surely. Sure. And even Helmut said, contracts only mean so much.
Well, all of this fountain of knowledge from you, Jennie, is all in your book, which we are going to talk about in a moment, I promise. But I know writing this book has been quite a big part of your recovery, and it's been quite sort of therapeutic, I guess, for you as well. Yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know, would you mind explaining what happened in December 2022?
Okay, so I had flu over Christmas and didn't think much of it. I was pretty poorly, but
winter flu.
Yeah, exactly. You don't think any more about it.
Christmas, we're all ill.
I know. And I didn't drink that Christmas because I felt that rough. So
But
that was
it was
a
bad,
good
everyone.
sign that I was really not well.
Having been to the pub after a race with Jennie before.
Yeah, I like to have fun. That's what I can say.
Liked a glass of wine after 5 Live, don't we?
Yeah, or during a
we all?
podcast or during a race. Who knows?
Just producer Paddy.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd had this cough, kind of a hacking cough, and I got up in the morning and left my husband and daughter in bed. And I went to the toilet and coughed. And that cough caused a dissection, like a split in my carotid artery, which is one of the 4 arteries that go up to your brain. So that caused a clot, which went into my brain and stopped the blood flow, which is otherwise known as a stroke. And strokes happen every 5 minutes. There's 1 stroke in this country. And they can have devastating effects. When I had mine, luckily my husband found me. He heard a loud thud. And nowadays I don't think he'd come running. But at that point in time, he was like, that's a bit strange. We have a 6-year-old, so no door is ever locked, which is quite lucky now in hindsight. So he was able to find me quite quickly. And we went to hospital. They transferred me from my local hospital up to a specialist hospital, St George's, where I had an operation to remove the clot. And yeah, my recovery from there has been trying to learn how to speak again, because unfortunately where the clot happened in my brain is exactly where my communication centre is. So it's... I think my husband described it quite well when he was explaining it to my daughter at the time. He said, Mummy's rebooting. And I was. It was like someone had unplugged me and plugged me back in, and I had to learn everything again, from the simple things of standing up, how to hold something. Everything was kind of very new to me. But I kind of think... My stroke happened when I was 45. I didn't have any factors which would signal that I was going to have a stroke or that I was at risk. And I think what this has taught me is that it's important for us to talk about stroke, because not many people do. I certainly hadn't heard many people talking about stroke, or anyone talking about stroke, when I had mine. And they happen to people from any age. But yeah, the book was, as you say... came out of the blue. The BBC asked if I was interested in writing a book, and I was like, I've just had a stroke.
Not now, that's actually...
Yeah, I didn't think they realised, but they did. And I had a conversation with the publisher, and I said, I don't think I'm the right person for this. Try Andrew Benson. And they said, no, if you want to, let's try some drafts and see how you go. So the book is like A to Z. So I don't have to follow like a conscious stream through it. So there's no plot. Not going to spoil the book by telling you that. But I started with A and I, because those were the first... I'm not going to get emotional. They were the first sounds I was able to make after, I think, 6 days of not being able to communicate at all in hospital.
Oh, God.
The nurse said, yeah, she just told me to get really angry and try and find some words. So yeah, A and I were the first noises I could make, apart from this weird laugh, which I don't know where it came from. And my husband often made me laugh in hospital, and we found this whole thing, we were able to cope with it through humour, and I think if I'd got too serious, it wouldn't have been very good. But yes, so I tried, and thankfully, I was able to do it, and they said, yeah, we quite like it, and now I have a book.
But honestly, it's... I bet you'll agree with me, it's like nothing has ever happened.
Completely.
In such a short space of time. You said December 2022. We're now coming up. That was not even 2 years ago. Your recovery has been extraordinary. To ask a ridiculous question, how have you done it? Because it is an unbelievable recovery to the Jennie we're sat here with today.
Well, thank you. Firstly, I don't really know. I think I'm very driven.
Clearly.
And I think that's got me through some of it. I also think I've learned a lot from the F1 paddock. And when you're around these amazing people that work in F1 day in, day out, you hope that a little bit rubs off on you. And certainly the mentality of an F1 driver, I think that has rubbed off on me. And I remember one of my first interviews with David Coulthard, and he said to me, I don't really care about the positive feedback. I only want the negatives that I can work on improving. And that is very much me. And I think the world of drivers and media cross over in that point of view, because as broadcasters, you never get positive feedback. You
never.
only hear the negative stuff. And it does make you kind of hardy, but also it drives you on to the next thing. And with my recovery, I was just determined to get back. It's something very primal. And I've just worked really hard, relentlessly, on trying to get better.
I imagine writing a book at the best of times is probably... Like, writing a physical book for anybody must be... You just must be so proud of yourself. But for you, after everything you've gone through, and you've managed to write a book in just 2 years, less than 2 years after you've gone through this, you must be so proud of yourself. Like, this is incredible, Jennie.
It's ridiculous.
I don't really believe it. It's unbelievable in the term of I've actually written a book, my name's on it. Someone designed the front cover, a guy called Jack, who's so talented. And it's real and it's out there for people to order. And yeah, I did a thing.
Whilst recovering from a stroke.
You didn't just do a thing.
And coming back into F1, you did a number of things. It's ridiculous.
Well, I used it, as you say, as therapy. And I wanted, it was good for me to have something to like act as a deadline, as a challenge. I'm very much deadline driven. Being a journalist, I think it's instinctual in you. So I broke it down to trying to be manageable. So every day I had to write 600 words. And the first challenge was opening a laptop, which I hadn't done since my stroke. And just learning what everything was again. Like, how do I open a document? How do I type? Like, it was as basic as that. And I thought 600 words a day was impossible until I started writing. And it was like all the information was there. And I just had to tap into it and get the words down. And I've had good copy editors. My editors at Penguin have been amazing. So I've had lots of help along the way. But I didn't want a ghostwriter. And I didn't want someone... I'm going to get emotional again. Oh, my gosh. To record the audio version of the book. I think that would have broken my heart.
What was it like when you first held it and you received it?
Yeah, that was a good day.
It must have been amazing.
Again, you can't quite believe it. Like, it's such an emotional connection to what I've gone through. And I suppose the last 15 years of my life are encapsulated in that book. And it's not just a kind of dry glossary of F1 in an A to Z manner. Hopefully, I've tried to encapsulate some of my personality in there, some anecdotes from my time in the paddock and the extraordinary people I've been lucky enough to meet. You know, our job is all about sharing what we are lucky enough to experience on a weekly basis in the paddock and lifting that curtain on what goes on. And we are so privileged to be in that position to speak to the drivers on a regular basis. These are F1 drivers. There are only 20 of them
elite
in
level
the world.
Athletes, yeah.
maybe 22 this year. But anyway, there are
It's been
not
about 28 this year, but yeah. Normally.
Even you've got a child. No.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I'm doing a stint with RB next week.
It's an extraordinary world to live in, and I love sharing it with people. And I couldn't do that when I was at home with all the effects of the stroke. And this was just my way of being able to connect with the F1 paddock and with the listeners to the Checkered Flag and the people that I've met along the way. It just feels like it was a lot of hard work and at times hugely emotional. But I just hope that people like it. That's all I really want.
So like you say, the book sort of goes through a alphabetical style. So you've got like N, which is like Norris and nuts and something else.
Not those ones.
Not those.
Nomex,
yeah.
which is the...
You just love talking about nuts and pants.
It's the only one I remember.
Nomex
Honestly,
is basically the underwear that people have to wear. It's a fireproof material that means you are protected if your car gets into a fire.
So that's why nuts and Nomex are in the same chapter, is it?
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
You've got to protect them.
Yeah, you really do.
And
You
check
really do.
them.
You mentioned the F1 world. Those listeners who've been with the podcast since like when we started might remember this episode. But one of the first times I went to F1 in a working capacity was right at the start of last season at the Miami Grand Prix, where I covered for Jennie, who was still in recovery. And such was the intensity of Jennie's job that at one point, a friend of the Fast and the Curious podcast, Rebecca Banks, who sorts out a lot of our interviews with Williams, wonderful woman, looked at me and was so worried about me that she went into full mother mode because I had been into the paddock. I'd been into the pit lane and got covered in dust. I'd then recorded the Checkered Flag podcast in the paddock where we discovered that the umbrellas were blocking the radio signal, so I had to do it in the sun. I was basically sunburnt, covered in dust, filthy. Like and Bex took one look at me and went, "Christian, I'm going to get you a hat and some water. You don't look well." Now, this is Jennie's job, right? Jennie's job is running up and down the paddock at 100 mile an hour. Then you need to go and interview a driver in the pen. Then you need to be in the pit lane.
Oh,
Jennie...
it's the coolest job ever.
Right, yeah, it is. I had the most amazing weekend. I loved it. I was like a competition winner, basically doing Jennie's job. It was ridiculous. But then, Jennie, you've just been talking about all of this, and it's like, how is doing that job again after the physical challenge of what you've been through? Because I struggled, and I'm a theoretically fairly fit guy in his 30s. Like, oh my God, you to do done what you've had to go through in the last year and do that, getting back into the F1 paddock and doing that job must have been, let alone writing a book and all that, must have been a whole nother challenge.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. So I've had a lot of support getting back into the paddock. I mean, F1 as an organisation have been amazing, and I don't think many people would have tried to do it as quickly as I have.
No, they wouldn't, Jennie, absolutely not. Whilst writing a book at the same time. No, they would not.
But I just felt like I had to, I just needed to, because there were moments in my recovery, certainly early on, that the question was raised of, will she ever speak again? And as a broadcaster and someone who loves to speak...
Love a chat.
That's really hard to hear.
It's your livelihood, isn't it? That's what you've based your job off, is speaking, writing.
Yeah. It kind of defines who you are outside of being a mum and a wife. And yeah, I found those conversations really hard. So I was just like, I need to get back. Because I've got to do this. So my first proper race back, it wasn't even my proper race back, but the first race I ended up covering in part was Zandvoort. I didn't know if I could take all the noise that goes on in the pit lane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
ridiculous.
So overwhelming at the best of times, isn't
the
it?
whole F1 world is the paddock, the pit lane, the crowds when you're coming into the track. It's an assault on the senses.
Yeah, especially Zandvoort, where they fill the grandstands with 120,000 people all dancing around to techno. I mean, it's a full-on aggressive sensory overload. So going into that environment, I didn't know if I could sink or swim. It was one or the other. And you've got your producer in your ears, you've got program output going into your ears, you're trying to have a conversation with Rosanna, then you've got to have conversations with people in the pit lane, you're taking live timing because you're throwing into or out of something. There's a whole lot going on, and I didn't know if I could handle that. But as soon as I put those headphones on, I was like, oh, oh, okay, this is fine.
I can do this.
I can do this. And the same with going onto that grid. That was the thing that really was the defining moment, I suppose, was could I go onto a grid, which is a place I love, and get back into what I used to do without being overstimulated, without losing it, for want of a better word. And I remember going onto the grid in Zandvoort. You've got all those fans in the grandstand waving their flags. It's such a merry place. I mean, it's just joyous to be there. And when they play their national anthem, and you've got Max going to be a world champion, and all those things add to this sense of occasion when you go to Zandvoort. And the cars going past you, they switch their engines off and they're manoeuvred into place on the grids. There's so many people, as you know, you get onto that grid. It's a really special place, but it's also a bit of a...
And you've got to have your wits about you, because you could be in the way. There's somebody wheeling a set of tyres. Like it's as I say, sensory overload. There's so much going on. And
all the time you're trying to describe what you're seeing to the listener at home. And I didn't know if I could do that. But honestly, it was just like walking back into your own play. I could do it. And it just seemed like home. And that moment I was like, thank the Lord. I think I've dodged a bullet here.
Did you say your daughter came out with you and your husband?
So she has been to some of the races. She came with me to Silverstone, which is where I suppose I made my first proper comeback, and I interviewed Lewis Hamilton. Lewis was extraordinary in that he left... You normally get 10 minutes and that's it. And you've got the PR person, Rosa, at the back going... when your 10 minutes is up, and that is, you've got to go. They were very kind in giving me that time to settle my nerves, to find the words I wanted to, and to do that interview was great. So I think, it's been small steps, and it was really nice that Isabel, my daughter, was able to be there that weekend and experience kind of me getting back into it.
That's what I wanted to ask. That must have been so emotional for your daughter, being able to see her mum get back to where she was.
Well, if I go back to that, my mum's rebooting stage, she all along was like, do you think mummy's at a 3? Do you think mummy's at a 7 now? And when she got around to the 7s, I was like, okay, this is a good sign. Because I think there was a time that we all thought I'd stay at about 3 and wouldn't be able to keep on learning and relearning stuff and developing. And the world of motorsport, of F1, the fans, the world of broadcasting, I mean, everyone, it felt like, was behind me. And it meant so much that I wasn't alone, and that I could talk about stroke, and that I could try and raise some awareness. It feels like it's given me a second purpose in my career. Of I don't have the largest platform in the world, but I do have a platform, and I feel like I wanted to use this as, for good.
Absolutely.
Well done for talking about it. We've got some questions from listeners that have come in.
Okay.
Not about your stroke actually, but more about Formula One in general.
I would like that.
Is that all right?
Yeah,
please.
So the first one is from Sam, and she asks, what's your favourite and least favourite pit lanes on the calendar, and why?
Oh, that's a really good question. Favourite pit lane, probably Austin. I mean, Silverstone is great, but half of it's like behind a wall.
Yeah.
So the bottom half is always like behind a wall, and you can't feel that amazing vibe. I get why they've done it, but it's such a shame that half of the grid is hidden from the people who are in the grandstands. So that would be my favourite, but actually kind of it's half of it is my favourite and the other half I hate. Sorry.
So half of Silverstone and Austin.
Yeah, let's go for that. That seems like a good split.
Why Austin? Just because of the atmosphere?
Oh, the vibe is amazing. Just looking up to turn 1, you get a real... I mean, you cannot... I think Harry Benjamin did some stat work, and he's great for stat work. I think he said you put 13 F1 cars on top of each other, and that's the height of the Phil Hill, as I call it, going up to turn 1. And it is just a massive run upwards. And I mean, it's just looking at that, and the crowd is amazing. There's loads of places where you can just stand as a fan and watch. You don't have to have a seat. And those are the circuits, I think, that are some of the best, like Hungary. Amazing. If you want to go to a race for the first time, I would say Hungary is a great place to go.
Oh, okay. And she also says not to be too cheeky, but she's got another question.
Oh.
And it is, what's your best memory in a pit lane?
Oh, my goodness me. I needed more time to prep for this. This is bad. Well, one of the most recent memories that really stands out is, so Steve Crossman works for the BBC. We all know him. He's great. And he came to the final race of 2021.
I was so jealous. I was like, how does Steve get to go to that race?
the best
race ever.
Yeah. So he kind of, in a way, took my role. And I just supported him in the pit lane and taking him around and meeting people. And
because you're normally presenting the 5 Live
yes.
coverage, and he's like one of the big sports presenters, so he did that, and then you were
so he was
stuff.
presenter, and I was kind of pit lane helper. And this, the whole, I mean, you talk about 2021 and everyone goes, and the reaction is like, it's very sharp and focused in people's minds. But after Max was declared the winner, he ran through, went onto the grid, and his mechanics lifted him up and they celebrated, and Kelly, his girlfriend, was there, and they were all really overjoyed. And I was there with Steve because I was like, let's run. So he ran with me. We went onto the grid. And the first interview that Max gave was to Steve, as I shuffled him over and said, speak to this man. His Steve is great. And the first interview of him as official world champion was on 5 Live.
Wow.
Boom.
And that is why you're so good, because you were like, let's run to the action. We're not going to watch this. We're going to get in there.
Yeah, I think being in there is such a treat. I mean, it's the dream.
That's ridiculous.
And we're living the dream, and I just love every moment of it.
And this is kind of going back to where we've started. Kira has sent in this question.
With motorsports journalism being such a fast-paced and competitive industry, how important has building connections and your network been to your success? And what advice would you give to anyone also looking to build connections in F1? By the way, I can't wait to read your book.
Oh, that's kind. Thank you, Kira. So connections are everything in F1, I think. In journalism in general, you go back to old school journalism where people had to phone their contacts, and you had a contact book, like a massive wedge of people that you could contact in whatever happens. So as a journalist, you rely on those contacts so heavily. And yes, they can help you get jobs, they can open doors, but you have to treat your contacts in the right way. Don't take them for granted. Don't just always rely on them to do everything. You have to put in the legwork. You have to make it happen. And you have to be persistent. Don't look at a door and say, oh, well, that's closed. It's partially open. You just need to find a way of opening it fully. It's difficult because I would say don't pester too much, but pester enough.
Yeah, that's a really fine balance. You're absolutely right.
But yeah, don't take a no as a no.
It's hard to get that balance right, isn't it? When you really want something, you're there, just like emails constantly.
But you shouldn't expect to be able to jump up to where we are at the start of your career. I would say, biggest tip I would say is make sure you do all the things on the way up. You learn about journalism, you learn about the legal side of things, you learn about how a production is made and works, and you put the groundwork in place and the foundations in place to have a really successful and long career. If you just parachute in at the top level, you might not have the resilience to keep on going.
Yeah, and the best way of learning is doing it. So if you come in at the bottom and start as a runner or a broadcast assistant or research or whatever they're called nowadays, that's the best way of learning, isn't it? And picking up those skills. And then you create those contacts as well, don't you?
I feel like I'm learning. I've got 2 phenomenal sports broadcasters here in front of me, and I feel like I should be taking notes. I'm enjoying this.
Why aren't you?
Yeah,
sorry.
You've got your iPad, mate. Come on.
Write
it down.
Sorry. Oh, I've locked the iPad and it's not mine. It's produced. What's the code, Jimmy? Right, good.
Classic. Great answer, Jenny. And finally, can you please sign our helmet? So we've got a helmet.
Do you want me to get the helmet?
Yeah, got then.
Yeah, you explain.
So we've got this helmet, and when we get a guest on our podcast, we get them to sign it. So we've had all sorts: Gunter Steiner, Will Buxton, Ruth Buscombe.
I don't want to devalue this
Alex
helmet.
Albon and Logan Sargent.
Is that okay?
It's perfect.
That's a perfect.
I mean, I've just put Jenny. It's the most basic.
Put what you
It's
like.
the most basic signature
We've not had
that
another
I
Jenny
could
on the
possibly do.
podcast.
I love it. Jenny from the paddock,
Not
not from the
Not
blog.
from the block.
Yeah, I've just spent all morning signing some books, signing
So
some
you
of my
come
own
here
books.
and we make you sign something else.
I love it. It's something I've never had to do before. I mean, I get asked for autographs sometimes in the paddock, but not very often. People just want selfies now. So
we're old
I've
school.
had to learn how to do a signature.
And in Austin, I was asked to sign someone's helmet, and it made me think of the Fast and the Curious. Someone bought with them a helmet to a podcast live show. I said they could have just bought a cap; it'd be a lot lighter, but they bought a helmet.
And was it just you signing it, or have they got other signatures on there?
I was the only person to have signed it at that point, which is a
quite
sad
niche.
state of affairs for
Is
their
it a full
F1
size?
weekends.
God, I hope they
Full-size helmet.
It was a
Don't wanna
full-size
sell
helmet.
it.
That person raced karts. Yeah, it was a full-size helmet.
Okay. I mean, I'm not
No,
discrediting
I
it.
was as
think
surprised
it's-
as you.
It's bold.
And every time I'm asked to, it's very bold. And every time I'm asked to sign a cap, those caps are bloody expensive. I'm like, do you really want
Yeah,
to
I
ruin
do the
this cap?
same.
Like,
So don't want to
if
ruin
you
it.
like, if you meet any of us at Grand Prix, don't ask us to sign your caps. They're worth the fortune.
Yeah.
You don't want us scribbling on them. You really don't.
Maybe on the inside.
Inside,
Is that okay?
I literally
mean-
ask if I can do it on the inside. People go, no. It's like, I don't want to scribble on this £80 hat. Anyway, Jennie Gow, it has been an utter pleasure having you here, hearing your story. The book, How to Read F1, is out now, online, in good bookshops. But Betty, hold it up to the camera. There you go. And Jenny, we really appreciate you coming in. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.